You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one-on-one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1279. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. We want you to thrive, to have that great marketing, and to know the operations, and to make smart decisions, and not take on too much risk, but also we want you to love it. We don't think that you have to give up all the things you love about the world and the change you want to see and your personal ethics and morals and just like the social justice you stand for. We shouldn't have to give that up just to have a successful business. We don't think that those are mutually exclusive here. So we interview people 5 days a week now that are talking business, they're talking strategy, they're talking clinical, all sorts of different things. And I just love that those two worlds actually come together today with Carrie Wiita, who is an adjunct professor, consultant, former professional actor, and creator of Interpersonal Branding, the first marketing and professional identity development framework for therapists and other service providers. She hates trickle-down marketing that makes the therapist feel cringy about putting themselves out there, and is rabidly obsessed with helping therapists improve clinical outcomes and craft a sustainable career using interpersonal branding. Carrie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, I love it. We were just talking about just all the ups and downs of being an adjunct professor and consultant and all these things. But we didn't talk about you being a professional actor. Tell me about what you did.
Oh, yeah. It was wild. I was a working actor for about 15 years in Los Angeles. That was my lifelong dream, and I was really lucky enough to be able to do it. But it is another one of those situations where once you find out how the sausage is made, you can kind of come to realize that maybe it doesn't look quite, it looks different than what it is on the inside. I did a lot of television commercials. I was in Adam Sandler's worst movie. I'll let you try to figure out which one that was. And most people these days know me from there is a Geico commercial that has been coming out pretty regularly around Halloween, where it's a haunted house commercial, and one of the teens trying to evade the serial killer encourages the group to try to get in the running car. And that is me. That's my big claim to fame.
If we can find that, we will put that in the show notes.
Great. I love it.
Oh my gosh. Well, tell me how you got interested in interpersonal branding therapy. Like, how did that happen where it all just got blended together for you?
Yeah. Well, I think it has a lot to do with, I had a very circuitous, obviously, path to this profession. I came to it after I kind of pivoted out of the entertainment industry. And one of the things that in that pivot, trying to find what I wanted to do, I had, started a blog online, and I really enjoyed that. And the social media was just kind of starting to take off. And so I was interested in this idea of like creating something and putting it out in the world that I had more control over, that was more aligned with what I wanted to give to the world, right? And what I really realized was, what was missing in the entertainment industry is something like truly meaningful and fulfilling for me. And that's how I found my way to the mental health profession. And as soon as I got into grad school, I mentioned this to you, I started listening to your podcast and a couple others, but I think had a misunderstanding from the beginning that this was a field that really embraced kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, because I was hearing your voice
I
early
brainwashed
on.
you.
Yeah, you did. You brainwashed me pretty good. And so then I got into school and I realized that the reality was very, very different. The attitude towards marketing in this field was shockingly negative. And more so, like, I had a marketing background myself. I had an acting background, so therefore I had kind of a personal branding background. And just in every position I'd ever had in my life, marketing, even in the nonprofit sector, marketing was just seen as how you connect what you do to the people who need it. But in psychotherapy land, it had a really negative connotation. And I got very curious. One of the things that we, in my program that I did, I went to California State University, Northridge. We do a culminating experience. And so I chose to do a project, which ended up being a 250-page interdisciplinary literature review on the intersection of psychotherapy and marketing. It was supposed to be just a small, lit review on what does our field have to say about marketing, like what's the best way to do it, what works best for clients, what's most effective. And turns out the literature on that in our field is very, very scant. And so I had to turn to other fields, other disciplines, and kind of combine it all together. And through that work, that's really how we developed interpersonal branding.
Now, through that research, you've really found what therapists struggle with and why, like a lot of the history of it, just the kind of dynamics of kind of metaculture, macroculture. Take us through why therapists are kind of set up for failure when it comes to marketing.
I would love to, because I feel like this is, if I can kind of pull the veil back and reveal these things to therapists, I think it helps alleviate a lot of pressure. One of the things that I think I really put my finger on in the cultural fabric of our field is that we get handed upon entry to this field this unspoken message that good therapists don't talk about themselves in public. And I was really curious about where that came from. And the more I read, the more I realized there were two places it came from. I should say there are on a macro level, there are three major kind of reasons why therapists struggle with marketing. There's historical reasons, there's cultural reasons, and then there's methodological reasons. And the historical reasons, where I want to start, because it is kind of a moment for a lot of people. If you think back to the very beginning of our profession, the very first approach to therapy was psychoanalysis. And a core tenet in psychoanalysis, a core piece of that, is transference. And psychoanalysis itself doesn't work without transference. And to have the transference process happen, the therapist must be a blank slate, like a blank screen is what they called it, or a mirror, an entity that is unknown to the client, right? And so any kind of, if a therapist was revealing or self-disclosing too much, it was seen as a mark of an amateur. You were a bad therapist because your therapy wouldn't work because you weren't unknown. And so from the beginning, there's this rooted sense of like self-disclosure is associated with therapists who are not good at the job, right? Coupled with that, it was at the same time also an issue of liability. At the time that psychoanalysis and psychotherapy started mainstreaming to people, you had a situation where all of a sudden mental health treatment shifted from something that was treating folks with severe mental illness in asylums to treating folks who could pay for analysis on a regular basis. So you had upper class folks who had time and money to spend for something like that. And this meant that suddenly a lot of women were actually spending a lot of time alone in a room, flat on their backs, with a man who was not their husband. And so when there were accusations of clinician impropriety, one of the pieces of evidence that they used to determine if something terrible had actually transpired was how much the client knew about her analyst. Because if she knew a lot about him, then that could indicate they'd been talking about more than clinical stuff, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was a way to both demonstrate your proficiency or your competence as a therapist to be unknown to your clients. And it was also an issue of liability to protect yourself from being accused of anything. And so this idea of that's where we start to get the seeds of this sense that good therapists don't talk about themselves in public. And then this message was actually codified into the actual ethical codes of our profession from the very beginning. We patterned ourselves, the therapy profession. We wanted to make sure that we were seen, respected, and validated, and so we wanted to really pattern ourselves on the medical profession. And so from the beginning, we tried to kind of copy the medical profession both culturally and clinically. You see that in the creation of the DSM, which mirrored the ICD, but the first APA Code of Ethics was itself modeled on the Code of Ethics for the American Medical Association. And in that establishment, I think it still exists very much to today, in the medical establishment, there's a very condescending attitude towards marketing. It is seen as something that working class people have to do. Especially at that time, it was considered a lowbrow activity to be advertising yourself. Upper class, white-collar professionals like medical providers shouldn't have to stoop to such a lowbrow activity. And so it became part of what was considered quote-unquote professional in our field, because that's what was considered professional for doctors. It became professional for us to not brag about ourselves, to be modest in advertising. And this was actually written into the ethics codes, things like how you could display your practice in the phone book back in the day. There were actually edicts against using like bold-faced font or setting off your ad in a little box. That was considered distasteful and inappropriate and unethical. So these guidelines in the ethical codes, they remained until the 1980s. And we would have voluntarily kept them, except the FCC got involved. The FCC started requiring all professional organizations to relax their restrictions on advertising because they saw it as a crime against the consumer, because you are preventing the consumer from making an educated buying decision by unnaturally restricting them getting information about the service or product that they're buying. And so against our will, we did start to relax these things by the 80s, but the damage had been done by that time. Our cultural kind of approach or ideas about advertising and marketing had already been established by the 80s. And so I think that we are still seeing that damage today.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the DNA of our field for 100 years, from the late 1800s until the 1980s. I mean, if someone's career is 30 or 40 years, that's several generations of therapists that are dealing with this way of thinking. I had no idea. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really tough, and it's something that we don't talk about. And when we enter the field, I very much became aware of this, from professors or supervisors who would make condescending comments about people who had made a website, or how they had always had a full practice but never had a website. And I'm like, yeah, you started your practice before the internet.
Right.
You didn't need a website.
Lots of things were word of mouth back then because that's all you did.
Right, exactly. So I think that what is even more kind of thorny and frustrating for therapists is this message kind of good therapists don't talk about themselves in public. It comes in and it runs into a lot of other cultural reasons why marketing is really difficult. So, these days now we live in what has been described as a gig economy or a reputation economy, right? And this idea of good therapists they shouldn't talk about themselves in public, that's in direct opposition to the requirements of economic survival in a gig economy or a reputation economy, where your actual livelihood fully depends on talking about yourself in public, so customers know you have something to sell. So that kind of collision feels really icky for therapists. And we aren't given any tools, in our grad programs, in our trainings on how to handle that, how to navigate that tension. And the reality is that I read a lot of literature on sociology literature on work and the changing nature of work. The reality is the requirements of the gig economy and the reputation economy, they feel really icky for a lot of people. It's not just therapists. If you need to make a living, if you are of the economic class where you have to earn money to live and survive, you are subject to something called the commodification of the self. Basically, in the new economy, especially in a gig economy, especially for service providers like therapists, to an extent, you are required to turn yourself into a commodity to be advertised constantly. Because the internet lives forever, we now have this culture where you must be constantly putting forth an employable version of yourself. And you have to kind of manage that impression so that if you ever want to get hired at a job again, or if you want to have more clients come to you, that what you're putting out publicly is seen as employable or hireable, right? Mm-hmm. And so that requires this kind of always on sort of thing. Compounding that is the fact that you really only get one public professional identity these days because of something called context collapse. Have you ever heard of context collapse?
I've heard of it, but I couldn't give the definition.
Okay, no, let me tell you, because it sounds intense. It's so simple, but it's not something that we really think about. So used to be, for example, you could be kind of a different person with your family members, with your friends, with your work buddies. You kind of existed. They all existed in these different silos, right? And so you kind of managed your identity in kind of a different person with each of those contexts. But with the internet, all of these different contexts can see anything that you do in any other context. So all of these contexts have collapsed into one, right? And so there is this awareness, certainly, that what you put out on the internet, what you let get out on the internet, can be viewed by employers, can be viewed by your mom, can be viewed by your friends. And the threat there is that if any of these folks who know you, they have certain expectations of you, right? And if they come across you acting differently than the person that they know you to be, they experience what's called an expectancy violation. So their expectation of what you're like is violated. And that is experienced as a breach of trust. And so if you are trying to make a living in the gig economy and reputation economy as a service provider, where what you are, quote unquote, selling is a therapeutic relationship with you, having anything that threatens trust, especially at the beginning of building that relationship, is hugely problematic. And so that is something that therapists, I think, know as soon as you start trying to answer the questions of should I be on social media? Do I have to have a website? What they're really wrestling with is this restriction of all of a sudden who they are, their public professional identity has to be the same, and it has to be kind of appealing to anyone that you might need to do some kind of business with. And it feels extremely icky. It feels very restrictive. And especially for folks with oppressed or marginalized identities, they in particular, it can feel extremely damaging because, and they are put in a unique position of having to mask or withhold what could be very treasured, valued parts of their identity, or risk economic consequences. Because if parts of their identity are not perceived to be employable or hireable, then they can't be a part of this public professional identity. So it's these things that we feel on a gut level. And I mean, I'm telling you, I can't tell you how many therapists I've talked to about marketing who have cried, tears, angst, and like genuine despair over having to do this. But it's hard to put your finger on why. And I want therapists to know that this is why. This is where it's coming from. There are words to put to what is happening to you here.
Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your business. It's super easy to set up and get started. And if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all the data for you. It's no surprise 99% of businesses said the value they get for Gusto is worth the price. And here's the best part. Because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. Yeah, well, and I think that, and maybe you'll get to this too, like just thinking about, for me as like, I'm not full WASP, like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. My dad was Catholic and, but that kind of white middle-class culture. In general, the message I got was like, don't speak too much about your achievements, just as a general thing. And so then it's like, and there's always the trope of the like lawyer that's running after ambulances and also has their Better Call Saul on the benches. And it's like that, just the ickiness of that type of lawyer. Like none of us want to be that type of therapist, And so I think we categorize all marketing often as being slimy, as being this thing that it's like you're just desperate for clients, when really there's ways that you're just helping people know, like, and trust you. And if you do it in an authentic way and protect that reputation and make sure it's in line, then it actually helps people say, thank goodness there's a therapist that helps children with autism that are also allergic to corn. Whatever, however specific your marketing is. And so I've found that the more that I lead with just even things about my life, and granted, I'm a podcaster now, I sold my practice, but even as I had my own quirkiness in my practice, people were more attracted to wanting to come to my practice because they knew that I had a bit of an edge to me, that I had been in punk bands in college, that, I'd had leopard print hair when I was, in college, and just like, oh, wow, my teen who is acting crazy through their hair or whatever, rebellion, Joe gets it. And then there's also the like buttoned up crowd that maybe wouldn't, connect with me in that same way. And so I think that it's just the more that therapists can start to weave that stuff in, it's just so much better. My daughters, really picked a lot of their therapists by their tattoos and by if they like dogs. It's like that's what it takes for tween and teen kids to identify with someone. It's like, it's not if they're CBT trained. It's not their modality. It's like, do they seem nice? Do they seem like they are judgmental or not? And to them, people that like dogs that have tattoos are less judgmental than those that don't. I'm not saying that's accurate, but that's how they perceived it.
Absolutely. So you're putting your finger on something. So I think I was surprised to know that a lot of therapists actually don't even know the term personal branding. Had never heard of it, right? Which is shocking to me because I, coming from my background, I'm very familiar with those ideas, right? And this, brings us to the methodological reasons why marketing can be so hard for therapists. For a long time, personal branding is what has been available for service providers in terms of this, how do we approach marketing, right? And so if you don't know if this is the first time you're hearing the phrase, probably listeners of this show, this is not the first time you've heard the phrase, but I think it's okay if it is. Personal branding was something that came about in the 1990s, again, as we saw this shift to the gig economy. And it was this kind of innovative, groundbreaking idea to apply product marketing principles to people, because that had just never done before. And so you take these product marketing principles where you're supposed to assess what is special, what is unique, what is differentiating, right, about your product, what's the edge, what's the advantage over other competing products in a marketplace. Put a price tag on it, and then go out into the marketplace, and then it's marketing or advertising's job to, convince consumers that they should be paying X price for this product, right? And therapists, I think, in particular, like entrepreneurs don't have I'll tell you that right now. Entrepreneurs don't have a problem. My partner is an entrepreneur and went through an MBA program. Everyone I met in that world, they're happy to think about themselves in these terms. Like that, it makes perfect sense to them. But therapists hear this, and it just feels, it like hits all the wrong buttons. And what you're talking about, Joe, is like spot on from a client's perspective, from a consumer's perspective. Buying a therapist, shopping for a therapist is no different from shopping for anything else. It just feels so weird to us on our end of it. And it does feel very much like we are trying to first kind of evaluate our colleagues and figure out how we are, quote unquote, better. How do we set ourselves apart? How do they, not meet the standard? And then how can we, stalk our prey, which is our clients on the internet, and try to get in front of them and convince them that we're the best option. And, I think that this is why I saw a need for interpersonal branding, right? Because I do think the lack that really hasn't been a problem up till now, up until the service professions needed some kind of marketing, is that the personal branding rhetoric is missing this relational piece. It forgets that what we're talking about is a relationship. We're selling, as a therapist, you are selling who you can be to someone. And it doesn't, you bring up, kind of authenticity, these markers of authenticity, and incorporating your story, or if you have tattoos, showing your tattoos rather than trying to cover them up. And a lot of personal branding advice assumes that you should start there. I've heard this a lot, that you should start with your own story or serve the person that you were 5 years ago, And I think that's great advice in most fields. I do think it misses the mark for therapists, because what we know from the clinical outcome literature is that any of the therapeutic stances associated with any of the theoretical orientations, from blank slate to open book, they work. They work for clients. They do are associated with improved clinical outcomes. So the reality is, as a therapist, you don't have to be an open book if you don't want to, clinically. And so I think for a lot of therapists who maybe kind of gravitate towards that end of the spectrum in their clinical work, marketing the advice coming out can feel very forceful, aggressive, and dragging them into being more public when they want to be more private. And that is something that interpersonal branding, I really emphasize, that it's a choice. The clinician has a choice to make. And it's something that I think is overlooked a lot in this jump to like the ideal client, that kind of thing. We got to start with the therapist and the therapist's personal boundaries and who they want to be in the world. And one of those questions is how public and how private you want to be, because you don't have to. There are plenty of unique and amazing things about you and how you work. There is not another therapist on this planet who works the way you do. But you don't have to show your tattoos if you don't want to. But you can if you want to. And so that's one of the things that I really try to safeguard or emphasize for therapists is I want to remind therapists they have autonomy, redeliver that autonomy to them in their crafting of their public professional identity. It is yours. You have the agency to do that. And my hope is that the therapists I work with see it as a creative project rather than something they're being dragged and forced into doing. Otherwise, they can't put food on the table.
So amazing. The last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I think that is what I would like therapists to know. I want you to remember that I feel like sometimes there is a tyranny of the right in this field. Do it right. Do it the right way or you're going to lose your license. Do it the right way or you're going to, damage your client. And the reality is, especially when it comes to who you want to be as a therapist, you have a lot more agency than I think you've been led to believe. And your therapist persona, your interpersonal brand, is your opportunity to craft who you are in the world. How do you help people? What do you do? And how do you do it differently? And I hope therapists are able to kind of embrace that and enjoy that process.
So awesome. If people want to work with you, if they want to connect with you, where should we send them?
Come to my website, www.interpersonalbranding.com. I will be on all the socials, and I have a Facebook group, Marketing for Therapists Who Hate Marketing. It's a free one if you want to come join us there.
So awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Joe.
I love working with researchers on this show that think through things in that historical perspective of just how we got here. There's times where we say it doesn't feel right and I don't know why. And sometimes understanding that history just really helps reveal that. For me, when I wrote Thursday is the New Friday, just learning that the 40-hour work week is less than 100 years old. Literally, this experiment is less than 100 years old. And it feels so common, so real, like this is how it has to be. But it's not. It's brand new. Like the boomers were the first people raised by folks that had the 40-hour work week. And so understanding history and thinking through it and how we got here is so important. And to know, okay, the feelings we have around marketing and that are reinforced often in grad school is not necessarily the only way. And that's why it's brilliant of you as the listener to hang out here and to challenge that mindset. We're doing this 5 days a week. We have some amazing sponsors. As you've been noticing, we have a lot of fun things coming up. So I just want to let you know that we are on the verge of closing the applications for that 7-figure practice retreat we're doing in the Dominican Republic. If you haven't applied for that, make sure you do over at practiceofthepractice.com/7. Doesn't matter if you spell it out, if you just put the number. Also, the group practice conference, that's happening May 4th and 5th. Those tickets are going on sale on Black Friday through Cyber Monday. And so there's only 300 spots there. And I bet probably a third of them already have been bought by sponsors and people that have pre-release. So you're going to want to grab your spot for the group practice conference. It's going to be here in this beautiful auditorium where TEDx was done. And then all of the breakout sessions, discussions are throughout an art gallery. So this isn't a lame conference in like some ugly hotel. It's literally in an art gallery. So it's going to be super fun. It's going to be just an amazing time of year here in Northern Michigan. So make sure you're on the wait list over at grouppracticeconference.com. Also, we couldn't do this show without our amazing sponsors. And today's sponsor is Gusto. As a therapist, you probably wear a million different hats and you still show up for your team. But Gusto can help take some of that load off, especially when it comes to payroll, benefits, and compliance. Unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price, no hidden fees, no surprises. You can try Gusto for free, for 3 months for free over at gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. Thank you for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.